When Adeline Smith woke up in an unfamiliar room, the last thing she remembered was getting into a car at Seoul's airport. Now she's a prisoner, forced into marriage with Marcelo Kang, the most feared man in Seoul. Her crime? Being the daughter of the man who killed his wife. His plan? To make her suffer for her father's sins. But before we begin, if you love dark romance and mafia stories filled with tension, revenge, and forbidden love, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Drop a like if you're excited for this story, and let me know in the comments what you think will happen to Adeline. Will she survive Marcelo's revenge? Can hatred ever turn into something more? Now, let's dive in. Light bit into Adeline's senses as consciousness crept back, sharp and unforgiving. Her head throbbed with a pain so sharp it felt like her skull might split open. She tried to move, but her limbs were heavy, uncooperative, as if they belonged to someone else. The air smelled wrong, too clean, too expensive. Like jasmine and something darker she couldn't name. Her eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar ceiling moldings, ornate and beautiful in a way that made her stomach turn. This wasn't her father's house. This wasn't anywhere she knew. Panic seized her chest like a fist. Where was she? The last thing she remembered was the car, her father's driver waiting at Seoul's airport, his familiar smile as he'd opened the door for her. She'd been so tired from the flight from Africa, so ready to finally be home after 3 grueling years of medical residency. She'd closed her eyes for just a moment in the back seat. Just a moment. Adeline jerked upright and the room spun violently. She pressed her palms against silk sheets, softer than anything she'd ever touched, and that scared her more than anything. Whoever had taken her had money, power, the kind that made people disappear. She stumbled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. The room was massive, easily 3 times the size of her bedroom back home. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, draped in heavy curtains that blocked out most of the light. What little filtered through told her it was either dawn or dusk. How long had she been unconscious? Hello? Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Is anyone there? Silence answered her, thick and suffocating. Adeline moved to the door, her bare feet silent on marble floors so polished she could see her reflection. She tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. She ran to the windows next, pulling back the curtains with trembling hands. The view stole her breath. Sprawling gardens stretched out below, manicured to perfection, leading to walls so high they might as well have been prison walls. In the distance, she could see Seoul's skyline, the city she'd dreamed of returning to, now looking like a mirage she'd never reach. A sound made her spin around. The door was opening. For a wild moment she thought about running, about fighting, about screaming until her throat bled. But when the man stepped through the doorway, every thought in her head evaporated like smoke. He was tall, easily 6'3", with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire frame. His hair fell past his shoulders, dark and perfectly straight, framing a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes so dark they looked black in the dim light. He wore an all-black suit that probably cost more than a year of her residency salary, tailored so precisely it emphasized every line of muscle beneath. But it was the coldness radiating from him that made her blood freeze. He looked at her the way someone might look at an insect they were deciding whether to crush. I see you're awake, Adeline. His voice was deep, accented with something she couldn't quite place. Korean, yes, but something else woven through it. Italian, maybe? Her name on his lips sounded like a death sentence. Who are you? She hated how small her voice sounded. Where am I? He moved into the room with the grace of a predator, each step deliberate and measured. He didn't answer immediately, instead walking to a chair near the window and sitting down, crossing one leg over the other as if they were about to have tea. My name is Marcelo Kang, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. And you, Adeline Smith, are exactly where you deserve to be. The way he said her last name made her skin crawl. Smith, her father's name. What did this have to do with her father? I don't understand, she said, backing up until her legs hit the bed. I just came back from Africa. I'm a doctor. I haven't done anything to you. Something flickered in those black eyes. Amusement, maybe? Or something crueler. No, he agreed, his voice dropping lower. You haven't done anything to me, but your father has. The room felt like it was closing in. Her father, William Smith, the man who'd sent her away to study medicine, who'd promised her a quiet life practicing in Seoul, far from whatever business dealings he was involved in. She'd always known her father lived in shadows, that the money that paid for her education came from places she didn't want to examine too closely. But she'd convinced herself it didn't matter, that she could be different, that she could save lives instead of whatever her father did with his. What did he do? The question came out as a whisper. Marcelo stood, and suddenly he was crossing the room toward her. Adeline wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. He stopped less than a foot away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and dangerous, like leather and smoke. Your father, he said, each word precise and cutting, killed my wife. The world tilted. Adeline grabbed the bedpost to keep from falling. No, she breathed. No, my father wouldn't. Wouldn't he? Marcelo's laugh was hollow, devoid of any warmth. William Smith wouldn't put a bullet in an innocent woman's head to try to provoke me, to test my resolve, to see if the rumors about me were true. Tears burned in Adeline's eyes. She wanted to deny it, to scream that he was lying, that her father was capable of terrible things, but not that. Never that. But the certainty in Marcelo's voice, the pain underneath the ice, told her he was telling the truth. Her name was Yuna, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost tender, and somehow that was worse than his anger. She was kind, gentle. She liked to paint in the garden in the mornings. She made our son laugh. I'm sorry, Adeline whispered, and she meant it. God, she meant it. I'm so sorry. Sorry. He repeated the word like it was foreign to him. Then his hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to look up at him. His touch was firm, but not painful, and that somehow made it more terrifying. Sorry doesn't bring her back, does it, Adeline? She couldn't breathe. His face was so close to hers now, close enough to see the fury burning in those dark eyes, close enough to see the grief he wore like armor. Please, she managed. I had nothing to do with this. I was in Africa. I've been gone for 3 years. I know exactly where you've been. His grip on her chin tightened just slightly. Saving lives in refugee camps. Playing the saint while your father played God with other people's families. How noble of you. The sarcasm in his voice cut deeper than any knife could have. What do you want from me? Her voice broke on the last word. Marcelo released her chin, but he didn't step back. Instead, he leaned in closer, his mouth next to her ear. I want you to suffer, he whispered. And the gentleness of his tone made it 1,000 times worse. I want you to know what it feels like to have everything ripped away from you. I want you to understand the pain your father has caused. But I didn't. You're his daughter. He pulled back to look at her again. His beloved daughter, the one he sent away to keep safe, to keep clean from his dirty world. Do you know how long I've waited for you to come back to Seoul? 3 years, Adeline. 3 years of planning, of watching, of making sure that when you finally came home, I'd be ready. Horror washed over her in waves. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. He'd been waiting for her specifically. You're going to kill me, she said, and it wasn't a question. A smile curved his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Eventually, maybe, but first, I'm going to make you useful. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a document, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. Congratulations, Mrs. Kang. We were married 2 days ago. The words didn't make sense. Married? Adeline stared at the document he held up, at the official seals and signatures, at her own name written in ink next to his. That's impossible, she whispered. I would never. You were very compliant when you were drugged, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. Signed everything I needed you to sign, even smiled for the photographs. Nausea rose in her throat. She'd been unconscious for 2 days. He'd used her like a puppet, made her sign away her life while she was drugged and helpless. This isn't legal, she said desperately. I can fight this. You can do nothing. His voice cut through her protests like a blade. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of your father, you are now my wife. Mine to control. Mine to use however I see fit. And your dear father will watch as I destroy his precious daughter. Slowly, painfully, knowing there's nothing he can do about it. That's the beauty of it, Adeline. You're legally bound to me now. He leaned in again, close enough that she could feel his breath on her skin. I'm going to break you. Piece by piece, day by day. I'm going to torture you in every way imaginable until you beg me for death. Until you understand what your father took from me. And when he finally comes crawling, begging me to spare you, I'll make him watch as I finish what I started. Adeline's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the bed, her hands shaking so violently she had to clench them into fists. Married. She was married to this monster, this man who looked at her with such pure hatred it felt like acid on her skin. Why? The word came out broken. Why not just kill my father? Why involve me? Marcelo walked back to his chair, sitting down again with that same unsettling calm. Because death is too quick, too merciful. I want him to suffer, the way I've suffered. I want him to lie awake at night knowing his daughter is in my hands, knowing every day that passes brings her closer to breaking. That's true revenge, Adeline, not a bullet, not a quick end, but the slow, agonizing knowledge that he caused this. I hate you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. Good. He stood, moving toward the door. Hate me, curse me, scream if you want. These walls are soundproof. No one will hear you. No one will come for you. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her one last time. Someone will bring you food. Don't bother trying to befriend the staff. They're loyal to me, not to you. And if you try anything foolish, if you try to escape or hurt yourself or refuse to eat, I'll make sure you regret it. Do you understand? She didn't answer. She couldn't. I asked you a question, wife. The word made her flinch. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to not look away even, though everything in her wanted to. I understand, she said through gritted teeth. He nodded once, then left, the door locking behind him with a soft click that sounded like the closing of a tomb. Adeline sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, her mind spinning in circles. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare. Any moment now she'd wake up in her small apartment in Africa, hear the sounds of the refugee camp outside her window, feel the familiar weight of exhaustion from another long shift. But the silk sheets beneath her fingers were too real. The ache in her head from whatever drug they'd given her was too real. She was trapped. Married to a man who wanted to destroy her. And her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, had caused all of this. The thought of her father made something hot and angry flare in her chest. How many people had he hurt? How many lives had he destroyed in his quest for power and control? She'd always known. He wasn't a good man. But this? Killing someone's wife? Leaving a child without a mother? A soft knock interrupted her spiral. The door opened, and a young woman entered carrying a tray. She was African, maybe Nigerian based on her features, around Adeline's age, dressed in simple but clean clothes. She moved quickly, efficiently, setting the tray on a table near the window without making eye contact. Wait, Adeline said, standing up. Please, what's your name? The woman froze, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting Marcelo to materialize and punish her for being spoken to. "I'm not going to get you in trouble," Adeline said softly. "I just want to know your name." "Kioma?" the woman said quietly, her accent confirming Adeline's guess about her origins. "My name is Kioma." "I'm Adeline, but I guess you already know that." Kioma nodded, still not quite meeting her eyes. "You should eat, ma'am. The Don doesn't like waste." "The Don?" Adeline let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call him?" "That's what everyone calls him." Kioma moved toward the door. "Please eat. I'll come back for the tray later." "Kioma, wait." Adeline took a step forward. "How long have you been here? Do you know anything about his son?" Fear flashed across Kioma's face. "I can't talk about the young master. I'm sorry." She left before Adeline could say anything else, the door locking again with that same terrible finality. Adeline looked at the tray. Rice, grilled fish, vegetables, all prepared beautifully. Her stomach turned at the sight of it, but she forced herself to eat anyway. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to find a way out, she needed her strength. The food tasted like ash in her mouth. The days that followed blurred together into a nightmare of isolation and silence. Kioma brought her meals 3 times a day, never staying longer than necessary, never meeting her eyes. Adeline was confined to her room, the door locked from the outside, the windows sealed shut. She had a bathroom attached to the bedroom, stocked with expensive toiletries and towels softer than clouds. There were clothes in the massive closet, all in her size, all chosen by someone who'd studied her from afar. The thought made her skin crawl. She saw Marcelo only once during those first few days. He'd entered without knocking, finding her sitting by the window, staring out at the gardens she couldn't reach. He'd stood there for a long moment, watching her with those cold, assessing eyes. "Comfortable?" he'd asked, his voice dripping with mockery. She'd refused to answer, refused to give him the satisfaction. He'd smiled at that, a cruel twist of his lips. "Silent treatment? How childish. But you'll learn, Adeline. You'll learn that I always get what I want." Then he'd left, and she'd been alone again with nothing but her thoughts and her growing desperation. On the 4th day, something changed. Kioma came with lunch as usual, but this time she left the door slightly ajar when she set down the tray. It was barely noticeable, just a crack. But it was there. Adeline's heart raced. Was this a test? A trap? Or was Kioma trying to help her? She waited until Kioma's footsteps faded down the hallway, then moved to the door. She pressed her ear against it, listening for any sound. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, she pulled it open. The hallway beyond was empty, stretching in both directions with doors lining the walls. Everything was marble and dark wood and paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Which way should she go? Where would lead her out of this prison? A sound made her freeze. Laughter. A child's laughter. Faint and distant, coming from somewhere to her left. His son. Marcelo had mentioned a son, a little boy who'd lost his mother because of her father. Adeline knew she should go the other way, should try to find an exit, should run as far and as fast as she could. But that laughter called to something in her. Something that had spent 3 years caring for children in refugee camps. Something that couldn't ignore a child's voice even in the middle of her own nightmare. She followed the sound. The hallway opened into another wing of the mansion, this one brighter, with more windows and less oppressive darkness. The laughter grew louder, leading her to a half-open door. She peered inside. The room was clearly a child's playroom, filled with toys and books and a small table set up with art supplies. And sitting at that table, drawing with intense concentration, was a little boy who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. He was beautiful. Dark hair like his father's, but softer, falling into his eyes as he focused on his drawing. His face still had that round, cherubic quality of early childhood, but she could already see Marcelo in the shape of his jaw, the set of his mouth. The boy looked up suddenly, as if sensing her presence. His eyes were dark, so dark they were almost black. Exactly like his father's. And just like his father, there was a wariness in them that no 3-year-old should have. "Who are you?" he asked in Korean, his voice small but steady. "I'm Adeline," she said softly, also in Korean. She'd learned the language years ago, had practiced it throughout her residency in preparation for coming home. "What's your name?" The boy studied her for a long moment, his crayon still poised above his paper. "Jiho," he finally said. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." "That's very smart," Adeline said, staying in the doorway, not wanting to scare him. "Your father taught you well." At the mention of his father, Jiho's face brightened slightly, then fell. "Papa is always busy. He says I have to be strong." Something in Adeline's chest cracked. This little boy trying so hard to be strong, trying to live up to his father's impossible standards, trying to fill the space his mother had left behind. "Can I see what you're drawing?" she asked gently. Jiho hesitated, then nodded, holding up his paper. It was a picture of a woman with long black hair and a smile. "That's Mama," he said quietly. "I don't want to forget her face." Tears burned in Adeline's eyes. This child, this innocent child, was another victim of her father's cruelty. Another life destroyed by William Smith's ambition and violence. "It's a beautiful picture," she managed to say. "Your mama would love it." Jiho looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to his drawing. "Do you want to color with me?" Adeline glanced back at the hallway. She should go back to her room before someone found her. Before Marcelo found her. But looking at this little boy, so alone in this big playroom with nothing but his memories and his crayons, she couldn't make herself leave. "I'd love to," she said, stepping into the room. She sat down across from him at the small table, and he pushed a box of crayons toward her, along with a blank piece of paper. For a while they colored in silence, Jiho stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "Are you here to take care of me?" he asked suddenly. "Like the others?" "The others. The ladies who bring my food and clean my room. They don't talk to me much. Papa says they're busy." Adeline's heart ached. This child was surrounded by people living in a mansion with dozens of staff, and he was still so desperately lonely. "I'm not here to take care of you," she said honestly. "But I'd like to be your friend, if you'd let me." Jiho's eyes widened slightly. "Really? Really?" A small smile tugged at his lips, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. "Okay, friends can share snacks. Do you want some cookies? The kitchen makes good cookies." Before she could answer, he was up and running to a small cabinet in the corner, pulling out a container of cookies. He brought them back to the table, opening the lid with the seriousness of someone sharing a great treasure. Adeline took a cookie, and they ate together, coloring and talking about small things. Jiho told her about his toys, about the fish in the pond outside, about how he wanted a dog, but Papa said not yet. He was bright, articulate for his age, and so achingly sweet that Adeline wanted to scoop him up and run as far away from this place as possible. Time slipped away from her. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, and Jiho's eyes started to droop. He'd moved from his chair to sit next to her, leaning against her side as he colored, and eventually his crayon slipped from his fingers. "Tired?" she asked softly. He nodded, yawning. "But I don't want you to go." "How about this?" Adeline said, though she knew she was making a mistake, knew she was crossing a line that would have consequences. "Why don't you rest for a little while, and I'll stay right here?" Jiho's face lit up. He climbed onto the small couch in the corner of the playroom, curling up with a stuffed rabbit. Adeline sat beside him, and within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. She should leave. She should go back to her room right now. But she was so tired, so emotionally exhausted from days of fear and isolation, and Ji-ho was warm and peaceful beside her. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just for a few minutes. She closed her eyes. The sound of the door slamming open jolted her awake. Adeline's eyes flew open to find Marcelo standing in the doorway, and the rage on his face made her blood turn to ice. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was low, deadly, the kind of quiet that was more terrifying than any scream. Ji-ho stirred beside her, confused and sleepy. "Papa?" Marcelo's eyes moved to his son, and for a moment, just a moment, something softened in his expression. "Ji-ho, go to your room." "But Papa, Adeline was just—" "Now." The command in his voice left no room for argument. Ji-ho scrambled off the couch, giving Adeline one last worried look before running out of the room. She heard his small footsteps disappearing down the hallway. Then, they were alone, and Marcelo's fury returned in full force. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. His grip was bruising, his face inches from hers. "You dare," he hissed. "You dare go near my son?" "I wasn't hurting him," Adeline said, trying to keep her voice steady even as terror clawed at her throat. "We were just talking." "You don't get to talk to him. You don't get to be near him. You don't get to exist in his world." Each word was punctuated with barely controlled rage. "Your father took his mother from him. The last thing he needs is to get attached to another person who will be gone soon." The implication hung in the air between them. Gone soon. Because Marcelo was going to kill her. Eventually. "He's lonely," Adeline said desperately. "He's just a little boy who misses his mother, and he's so lonely, Marcelo. I wasn't trying to—" His hand moved to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there in a clear threat. "Don't you dare say his mother's name. Don't you dare talk about what my son needs. You know nothing about him. Nothing about us." "You're right," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "You're right. I'm sorry. Please." For a moment, she thought he might actually kill her right there. She could feel his pulse racing against her skin, could see the war happening behind his eyes. Then he released her, shoving her backward. "Get out," he said, his voice shaking with fury. Adeline stumbled toward the door, but before she could reach it, Marcelo called out to someone in the hallway. 2 men appeared, large and intimidating, wearing the same black suits she'd seen on other staff members. "Take her to the dungeon," Marcelo said, not looking at her. "Lock her in the east cell. No food, no water, no light." "No," Adeline gasped. "Please, Marcelo, please don't." 3 days, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "She doesn't come out for 3 days. If anyone disobeys me, if anyone brings her so much as a drop of water, they'll join her down there." The men grabbed her arms and she struggled, panic overwhelming every rational thought. "Marcelo, please. I'm sorry. I won't go near him again, I promise." He finally looked at her then, and the coldness in his eyes was absolute. "You should have thought of that before you decided to disobey me." They dragged her out of the room, down hallways and staircases she'd never seen before. The mansion seemed to go on forever, each level taking them deeper underground, the temperature dropping, the air growing stale and damp. Finally, they reached a heavy metal door. One of the men unlocked it, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. They pushed her inside, and she fell hard on cold stone. "Wait," she cried out, scrambling to her feet. "Wait, please." But the door was already closing, the lock clicking into place, and then there was nothing but darkness. Absolute, suffocating darkness. Adeline pressed her back against the wall, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. She couldn't see anything. Not her hands in front of her face, not the walls around her. Nothing. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. 3 days. 3 days with no food, No water, no light. She slid down the wall, pulling her knees to her chest, and let herself sob. She cried for herself, for the life she'd lost, for the freedom she'd taken for granted. She cried for Ji-ho, that sweet little boy who deserved so much better than the hand fate had dealt him. She cried for Yuna, the woman she'd never met, whose death had set all of this in motion. And she cried for her father, because despite everything, despite the monster he'd become, he was still her father, and some part of her had loved him once. Time became meaningless in the darkness. She couldn't tell if minutes or hours were passing. Her throat grew dry, her stomach empty, but worse than the physical discomfort was the isolation. The darkness pressed in on her from all sides, making her feel like she was being buried alive. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcelo's face, saw the hatred burning in his eyes. She thought about what he'd said, about how she would be gone soon, about how Ji-ho didn't need to get attached to someone who wouldn't stay. Was that really her fate? To die in this mansion, a pawn in a revenge plot she'd never asked to be part of? The darkness whispered yes, on what she thought might be the second day. Though she couldn't be sure, Adeline started talking to herself just to hear a human voice. She recited medical procedures she'd learned in school, listed the bones in the human body, sang songs she remembered from childhood. Anything to keep the silence from driving her mad. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Her head pounded with a migraine that made her want to scream. Her stomach had stopped growling and started cramping, sharp pains that doubled her over. But worse than all of that was the creeping realization that maybe she deserved this. Not for anything she'd done, but for the sin of being William Smith's daughter. For benefiting from his blood money all these years, for turning a blind eye to what he was because it was easier than facing the truth. How many other people had suffered because of her father? How many other families had been destroyed? Yuna was just one victim in what was probably a long list of casualties in her father's quest for power. By the time the door finally opened, flooding the cell with blinding light, Adeline could barely move. She curled tighter against the wall, shielding her eyes from the sudden brightness that felt like knives stabbing into her skull. "Get her out," a voice commanded. Not Marcelo's voice, one of his men. Rough hands grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately, unable to support her weight. They dragged her up the stairs, through the hallways, back to her room. She caught glimpses of the mansion as they moved, the beautiful paintings and pristine floors, and it all seemed obscene compared to the hell she'd just endured. They deposited her on her bed and left without a word. Adeline lay there, too weak to even cry, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was what breaking felt like. The door opened again and Kioma entered, carrying towels and a basin of water. When she saw Adeline's condition, something flickered across her face. Pity, maybe, or recognition of suffering she herself had witnessed before. "Let me help you," Kioma said softly, setting down her supplies. She worked in silence, helping Adeline sit up, bringing water to her cracked lips in small sips so she wouldn't get sick. She bathed Adeline's face and hands with a gentleness that made Adeline want to weep. "Why do you stay here?" Adeline whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Why do you work for him?" Kioma was quiet for a long moment, wringing out the cloth. "Because he saved my life," she finally said. "I was trafficked, brought to Korea against my will. The Don found me, killed the men who hurt me and gave me a choice. Leave with money to start over, or stay, and work for him with protection. I chose to stay." Adeline absorbed this, trying to reconcile the monster who'd locked her in darkness with the man who'd saved Kioma from trafficking. "He's not all bad," Kioma continued, as if reading her thoughts. "But he's not good either. He's broken, and broken men do terrible things." "That was very brave of you," Kioma said suddenly, meeting Adeline's eyes. "Going to see the young master?" "Adeline," she corrected automatically. And it wasn't brave. It was stupid. Maybe. Kioma helped her lie back down, pulling a blanket over her. But I will advise you, don't do it anymore. The Don doesn't take kindly to disobedience. He's ruthless. I'm not afraid of him, Adeline said, and she meant it. After the dungeon, after 3 days of darkness and isolation, what else could he do to her? I don't care about his stupid rules. Kioma's eyes widened slightly. You should care. The dungeon was mercy, compared to what he's capable of. But Adeline wasn't listening anymore. She was already planning. She needed to get out of here. She needed to escape before Marcelo decided she was too much trouble and simply killed her. She'd survived medical school, survived 3 years in refugee camps with limited resources and constant danger. She could survive this too. Over the next few days, as her body recovered, Adeline watched. She paid attention to when the guards changed shifts, when the staff moved through the halls, when the mansion was quietest. She noticed that late at night, around 2 in the morning, there was a window of about 20 minutes when the guard rotations overlapped and the back hallways were empty. She also noticed that one of the guards had a habit of leaving his phone on the small table by his post when he went to check the perimeter. It was a small oversight, but it was enough. Adeline waited, biding her time, letting Marcello think she'd been properly cowed by her punishment. She stayed in her room, ate her meals quietly, didn't cause any trouble. She saw Marcello only once during this time, passing him in the hallway when Kioma was escorting her to a different room for a change of scenery. He'd stopped, looking at her with those cold, dark eyes, as if trying to read what was going on behind her carefully blank expression. "Feeling better?" he'd asked, his tone mocking. "Yes," she'd said simply, not giving him anything else. He'd looked like he wanted to say more, but then Ji-ho had come running down the hallway, calling for his father. Marcello's expression had shifted instantly, softening as he scooped up his son. "Papa! Papa, look what I drew!" Adeline had looked away, the sight of them together too painful. That little boy deserved to have his father's love, deserved to be happy. He didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of his father's revenge. 2 weeks after her time in the dungeon, Adeline made her move. She waited until the house was quiet, until she could hear nothing but the distant sound of the fountain in the courtyard. Then she slipped out of her room, moving on silent feet down the hallway. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away, but she forced herself to stay calm, to move with purpose. The guard's phone was exactly where she expected it to be, sitting on his table while he made his rounds. She grabbed it, shoving it into the pocket of the jacket she'd stolen from the laundry room, and kept moving. The back entrance was unlocked, just as she'd observed. It seemed too easy, but she didn't have time to question it. She slipped outside into the cool night air and ran. What Adeline didn't know was that 3 floors above, Marcello stood at his bedroom window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He watched her small figure dart across the manicured grounds, watched her slip through the shadows toward the main gate. His expression was unreadable, his dark eyes tracking her every movement. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, then set the glass down on the windowsill. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't call for his guards, didn't sound any alarms. He simply stood there, watching her run, a slight curve to his lips that could have been a smile or something far more dangerous. The road stretched out before Adeline, seemingly endless. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The mansion loomed behind her, its lights growing dimmer with each step, and she felt something like hope beginning to bloom in her chest. When she was finally far enough away that she could barely see the estate, she pulled out the stolen phone with trembling hands and dialed her father's number. It rang twice before he answered. "Dad? Adeline?" His voice was urgent, tight with worry. "Adeline, is that you?" "Dad." Relief crashed over her so hard she almost sobbed. "Dad, it's me. Thank God. Thank God you're alive." She could hear the strain in his voice. could picture him pacing wherever he was. I've been going crazy. When that bastard Marcelo took you, when I realized what he'd done, I've had men trying to find a way in, trying to get intel on the security, but that place is a fortress. So he knew. He'd known Marcelo had her. He'd been trying to get her out. I escaped, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. I'm on the road outside his property. I'm heading toward the city. Good girl, that's my girl. Her father's voice was fierce with pride and fear. Listen to me carefully, keep walking. Get as far from that mansion as you can. When you reach a main road, when you can see traffic and buildings, call me again and tell me exactly where you are. I'll have someone there to pick you up within minutes. Okay? Okay. I will. Adeline. His voice softened. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you. But you're going to be safe soon. I promise you. The call ended, and Adeline forced her aching legs to keep moving. The night air was cold against her skin, and every shadow made her jump, made her think Marcelo's men were coming for her. But no one came. The road remained empty, except for her. She walked for what felt like hours, her feet bleeding in the thin shoes, her muscles screaming for rest. But finally, the road widened. Streetlights appeared. And then she heard it, the beautiful sound of traffic, of cars and motorcycles and the hum of city life. She'd made it. Adeline pulled out the phone again, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She dialed her father's number. Dad, I'm here. I can see cars. There's a convenience store and some apartment buildings. I think I'm near Gangnam, based on the street signs. Perfect. Stay right there. Don't move. I have a man 5 minutes away. Adeline, you did it. You're almost home. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on... The screen went black. The phone had died. Adeline stared at it for a moment, then tucked it into her pocket. 5 minutes. She could wait 5 minutes. She moved closer to the convenience store, trying to blend in with the few people still out at this late hour. Time crawled by. Every car that passed made her pulse spike. Every person who looked at her made her wonder if they were Marcelo's spies, but she stayed put, watching the road, waiting for salvation. Then she saw it, a black sedan, expensive and sleek, slowing as it approached. The window rolled down and a black man in a black suit leaned out. Ms. Smith, your father sent me. Please, get in quickly. Adeline didn't hesitate. She yanked open the door and threw herself into the back seat. The car pulled away immediately, tires squealing slightly as it merged into traffic. Thank you, she gasped, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Thank you so much. The driver didn't respond. Adeline closed her eyes, letting her head fall back against the seat. She was safe. She was finally safe. But then she noticed the buildings passing by the window. They looked familiar. Too familiar. Her eyes snapped open and her heart stopped. They were turning around, heading back the way they'd come, back toward the mansion. Wait, she said, her voice rising. Wait, where are you going? This is the wrong way. The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, calm and emotionless. No, Mr. Smith, this is exactly where I'm supposed to go. No! Adeline lunged for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Child locks. No, 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 let me out. She pounded on the window, on the door, screaming for help. But the windows were tinted too dark. No one outside could see her. No one could hear her. The mansion came into view, its lights blazing in the darkness like a beacon of hell. And there, standing at the entrance as if he'd been waiting for her, was Marcelo. The car stopped. The driver got out and opened her door. Adeline pressed herself against the opposite side, but the driver simply reached in and pulled her out with practiced ease. Her legs gave out when her feet hit the ground. Fear, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of defeat made her collapse to her knees on the pristine driveway. Marcelo walked toward her, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then he smiled. And it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. "Clever of you, Piccola," he said softly, his Italian accent surfacing with the endearment. Adeline couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Marcello crouched down in front of her, reaching out to cup her chin with his hand, forcing her to look at him. "But I should remind you," he whispered, switching to Italian, his voice like silk wrapped around a blade. "Mi appartieni. Nessuno verrà a salvarti. You belong to me. No one is coming to save you." The words shattered whatever hope she'd been clinging to. Her father hadn't sent help yet. This man, this driver, he worked for Marcello. Had always worked for Marcello. No one was coming to save her. Marcello released her chin and stood, switching back to Korean. "Take her to the dungeon. Same cell. 3 more days." "No," Adeline whispered, but there was no strength behind it. "Please." "You should have stayed in your room, wife." The word was a mockery, a reminder of the chains that bound her to him. "Now you'll learn what happens when you defy me." The guards grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet. She didn't fight this time. What was the point? As they dragged her toward the mansion, toward the darkness waiting below, Adeline felt something inside her crack. But it wasn't her spirit that broke. It was something else. Some wall she'd been holding onto, some refusal to see the truth. Her father had killed this man's wife, had murdered an innocent woman, leaving a child motherless, shattering a family. And for what? Power? Territory? Some petty mafia dispute? How many other people had her father destroyed? How many other lives had he ruined? The dungeon door opened and they pushed her inside. The darkness swallowed her whole. But this time, as she sank to the cold stone floor, Adeline didn't cry. She sat in the silence, in the absolute blackness, and she thought about Marcello's face when he looked at Ji-ho. The grief buried beneath all that rage, the love he had for his son, fierce and protective. The way his voice had softened when he'd spoken about Yuna, about the woman who'd painted in the garden and made their child laugh. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man who'd had everything ripped away from him. A father trying to protect what little he had left. A widower drowning in grief and fury with nowhere to put it except on her. And she, whether she wanted to be or not, was her father's daughter. William Smith's blood ran through her veins. His sins were her inheritance. In the darkness, Adeline closed her eyes and let the truth wash over her. She understood now. She understood his hatred, his need for revenge. She understood why he couldn't look at her without seeing the man who'd destroyed his life. And somehow, that understanding hurt worse than any punishment he could devise. If you're captivated by this dark tale of revenge and forbidden connection, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss episode 2. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Can Adeline survive Marcello's hatred? Can understanding bridge the gap between them? And smash that like button to help others discover this story. See you in the next episode.